Now we're all quiet and prim and
So a big thank you. Welcome everyone to ICA's intelligence briefing on the next round of the new gTLD application process. Especially a big thank you to all of our members who are here today for attending and also for supporting our work. For those of you who might not be familiar with the ICA or the Internet Commerce Association, my name is Kamila Sonkiewicz. I am the Executive Director of the ICA, and joining me here today from the ICA is Zach Moskowitz, who is our General Counsel. We are a nonprofit trade association representing domain name registrants and domain name owners, and we are actually turning 15 this year, so we've been around for quite a while. Our mission is simple. It is to protect the rights of domain name owners and also to preserve the asset value of domain names. One of our goals is to provide educational resources for both our members and the industry. And as such, we hold monthly member calls on various industry topics. But today's call, we decided to open up to the public as we felt that the topic was relevant to a broader base. Hence, the call's open to everyone. We lined up an incredible panel of experts for you on the subject, on the new gTLD subject. We have our wonderful host and moderator, Krista Taylor. We have Jeff Newman with us, Jonathan Frakes, and Phil Buckingham. Jonathan, you messed me up. You'll hear more about the speakers soon, but I would like to extend a big thank you to all of them for taking the time and for sharing their knowledge and expertise with us today. So with this, I will turn it over to Krista. And again, thank you everyone for joining us today.
awesome. Thank you, Camelia, and welcome everyone to the Internet Commerce Association Business Intelligence Briefing on round 2 of new gTLDs. Again, if you're a newcomer to the industry and just joining us, welcome. If you're an ICA member or a seasoned industry veteran, welcome back. I'm Krista Taylor of Cum Laude and .tva. A few reminders before we get started. If you're tweeting about today's session, the official hashtag is ICA domains. And before we get started, I'd like to thank the Internet Commerce Association for hosting us today. And again, Camelia and Max for all of their help in arranging today. A few guidelines to keep today's discussion focused. This session is for anyone interested in applying or seeking insights on future application rounds of new gTLDs. We don't want to debate past actions or decisions, so I'm going to kindly request that everyone save those items for another time. There will be a question period at the end of the session, so please feel free to add your question to the Q&A pod in the chat. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome my panelists, Phil Buckingham, Jonathan Frakes, and Jeff Newman. Welcome, guys. They're all
Hi.
quiet. Before we jump in, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your background. Phil, you're on the screen, so maybe you should go first.
Yeah, hi, Krista. Lovely to be here. Where do I start? I got involved in 1995. I can't believe it. Had an interview in a derelict building in Baker Street in London and started a company called NetNames. So that's the start. And then 5 years later, we floated the company on the stock market, sold all my shares, quit, and then decided to come back into the domain name industry in 2009 and turned up at the ICANN meeting in Sydney. And God knows how many ICANN meetings I've done since. And obviously, moving forward, got involved in the round 2 of the applications because back in, I think it was 2010-11, I contacted Mike Salazar, who was running the program for ICANN, and put in a financial evaluation model based on 500 applications. And as we all know, we ended up with 1,930, I think it was, in 2012. So, and then started to get involved with the applications for a number of applicants all around the world.
Great. Thank you. Jonathan.
Hi, everybody. So my name's Jonathan Frakes, and a lot of you know me as the co-founder of NamesCon and Merge conferences. But I've been in the domain industry for quite some time. In fact, I was around for the formation of this great organization, the Internet Commerce Association. I guess contextually here, I had the privilege of working with the team at KPMG who performed evaluation services for ICANN on the last round. And so I have familiarity with reviewing the AGB Module 2 questions that related to technology. And so I have some insights kind of from inside the veil on what people applied for and the technology there. And through NamesCon, had the opportunity to promote and understand as these TLDs launched. And furthermore, I recently served 2 years as the executive director of the Domain Name Association, where a lot of the different organizations that were working to build marketplace integrity and other things related to the TLD launches were able to get out the word about new TLDs. Finally, I work on a project called the Public Suffix List. I'm one of the lead volunteers there, and those are what activate domains for browsers so that they don't send these new extensions into search. So it's kind of a variety of ways that I serve the domain industry, and I'm grateful to be here. And that's enough about me. I want to hear about Jeff. Thank you.
All right, I guess I'll join in. So my name is Jeff Newman. I have been in the domain industry since the mid 90s. I guess that's 25 plus years. I've served in a number of roles on the legal and policy side. So I was with domain registries, registrars, and to make a long story short for Rubens, who in the chats that I can take forever, I will just say that while at Newstar, I ran the registry services group for a few years, including during the time of the application process and afterwards. So worked on over 350 applications. I'm intimately familiar with that. And then one of the reasons that I'm on here is that I was co-chair for the subsequent procedures policy development process at ICANN, which was tasked with reviewing the last round and making recommendations for future rounds for new gTLDs. So I'll stop there.
It was way under an hour. Ruben's going to be very disappointed. Brief overview or background of myself. I'm head of marketing for the .brands with Con Laude, and I'm also founder of .tba, where I work with registries and attaining, launching, and growing their TLD assets. And it was also one of the participants in the SubPro working group. And the initial one, way back one, was on Work Track 1. So a little bit on myself. So I've created a few questions in what I think is hopefully a bit of a logical order. And I'm going to start with the really easy ones. So my first question is, in the last round, ICANN predicted about 500 applications and ended up with 1,930 with about 1,200 unique strings. What do you expect the interest level to be for the second round? And do you have any volume expectations? Super easy, see? Anyone want to jump in? Or should I put somebody on the spot?
I can jump in, that's fine. So look, I mean, it's not a number that anyone could really predict. It's going to be a function of fees, the application fees, which I'm sure we'll get into as well. So if the fees are similar to what they were the last time, I think a number similar to last time is probably what we'll end up with. If the fees drop for reasons that we'll get into later, then I can definitely see a doubling of that number. But I don't think it would be much more than that. I think I think people need to be realistic as to what can be achieved with the TLD. So I'm not one that's going to predict 10,000, 15,000 or anything like that. I think with a lower price, I think we can get, in theory, up to 5,000, but we'll see.
Awesome. Anyone else like to give their
Oh.
predictions?
Phil, do you want to go first, or do you
Yeah,
mind if I dive
I'll
in?
jump in. So, to be honest with you, my expectations are a minimum of 5,000. So, because I think we've kind of opened it all up this time. So now there's, and we'll come on to it later, but there's the applicant support. So that kind of opens it up that, not-for-profits, communities businesses in the third world might want to start considering applying. So I think once ICANN starts pushing out some kind of global marketing strategy and outreach, then the message is going to come back. So I think we're going to do a lot better than last time.
Okay, nice.
I mean, I think he's probably right. I mean, brands are looking at this very aspirationally as, a means to take advantage of a lot of the things that are built into the new TLD program, like DNSSEC from the start and your own castle, for lack of a better term, to operate. And so there's a high aspirational interest within the brand community. There's a variety of geographies, and certainly I know a lot of professional registrants and companies that have aspirations to open generics as well after looking at the last round. So Phil, you might be right. You might even be low.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that comes to my mind is that, ICANN has got to be ready to be able to take 5,000, and then we've got to figure out how quickly they can do it. And so, yeah, there's a load of factors here,
Sure, and price and complexity and, et cetera. There's a variety of things that'll obviously affect the number.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other big problem is this magical equation is, we're going to come on to what we think the application fee is going to be. Last time it was $185,000, but it's the whole program's on a cost recovery basis. So the end of the day here, we need to figure out, ICANN needs to figure out the demand. Then they've got to do a whole costing budget, and then they can kind of figure out what the registration fee is going to be. So the application fee is going to be. So yeah, a lot of factors, all interrelated.
So we're going to jump into costs, I think, a little bit later on.
Sure.
Maybe I'll jump into my next question of, do you think we're going to see the same type of breakout that we saw in the first round with, 60% generics? Jothan, you were just talking, you think we're going to get more brands. Brands had about 25% last time, and we had small percentage of IDNs, I think around 6%, communities 4%, and geos at 3%. Do you think any of those will, significantly increase? Well, maybe generics might come down. Any predictions or thoughts?
So you called me out, so I'll answer first. Within the brand community, I have had the privilege of speaking on panels in the brand registry group and at a variety of conferences where I'm invited in to answer questions to boardroom members, and whether it's small groups or other. And there is a robust interest within the brand community. I think I based my answer based off of that which I am exposed to, and I've certainly got the wisdom from a few decades in this business to know that I can't base what I believe to be the interest level just based off of who I'm talking to. There's a much bigger world out there. So I wouldn't say that necessarily what I'm saying is representative of the overall picture, but I am quite aware of quite a large, substantial interest within the brand realm.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, this is Jeff. I agree definitely on the brand interest, and I know that there's some that may be thinking, well, there's not much brand use at this point. That's the common thing I'm hearing. And we'll talk later that's not necessarily true. It may not be as high profile, but there's a lot of brand usage out there, and we'll talk about why brands are or have dropped out. But I do think that we're going to get substantially more brands. I think the percentage will certainly increase. And I also think that we'll get a decrease in the truly generic applications simply because of the results of the last round and financially and otherwise as to the success or lack thereof of certain strings. But I definitely think that we can easily get a higher brand percentage. And I think if Ruben's in the chat was right too. He said that the amount of geos may go down. And I think that I don't know if it'll go down necessarily, but if it's going to go up, it's not going to go up by much.
I agree. I think from the first round, we realized the amount of work, and the geos are actually a lot of work. I have firsthand knowledge on that one. So, I guess we'll see. Kind of jumping into the next section, which is, preparation. What needs to happen before the second round is rolled out? And what is your best estimate on the rollout of the program? I.e., when will it be announced? Perhaps when will the guidebook come out? I'm sure it'll be a super thin version, and any launch periods.
Okay, so I'm the most conservative of the bunch, so maybe I'll start, and then others will jump in. So, as someone who's worked on the policy process and the revisions, there are a lot of things that need to happen between now and an application window that opens up. Right now, I think we're sort of in what I'm calling the pre-approval stage from the ICANN board. There's a lot of technical terms, and I'm not going to bore you with what they call it, but essentially it's kind of a pre-planning phase right now. The board has not yet approved all of the new policies, and that's likely not to happen for a good 6 to 12 months. The reality is that we were expecting the ICANN board to start it sooner, but through lots of different things going on, the board hasn't even formally kicked off this pre-approval type process. And so once that gets underway, then you're looking at 2022 for the first opportunity for a draft guidebook to even come out, and that's after an implementation team is set up. So you're talking late 2022 for a guidebook, and then the outreach really needs to get into gear, and even the policies call for a formal outreach communications program. So I think, and again, I'm the most conservative of the bunch. I think we're not going to see a window opening up until, 2024 early, or maybe potentially late 2023. But then again, by the time you factor into the evaluations and everything, you're looking at new TLDs in the root by 2025. ICANN can streamline this. There are certain ways to do it. But at this point, we haven't seen ICANN working on streamlining that process. And, I don't know if we want to talk about why or what they can do and how they can do it, but that's just kind of and I can elaborate on that, but let me turn it over on timeline to other people.
Okay, my turn. Well, actually, Jeff, I kind of, I've written down 2025 in my head. So I'm the same as you. I think ICANN's got a huge amount of work. But I see a comment in the chat from Martin. Hello, Martin. I totally agree with you, Martin. ICANN could do loads of this stuff in parallel. And they could, why can't they just start a global outreach campaign starting tomorrow? What's stopping them? What's the problem? But that's just one issue, I guess.
Jothan, are you 2025 as well, or a little sooner?
I stopped giving out dates on this darn thing. It's like naming your dog Stay. It's cruel because, you get people interested and they, start to kind of align towards that North Star of the date you give. And unfortunately, there seems to be, kind of things put in place. Now, as a project manager and somebody, you need to work with some sort of scheduling dates. I don't think that 2025 is, I think that's really conservative. That's my hope. We're actually, likely to see things where you could apply late 2023 to 2024. I've given out dates and had to eat crow on them so many times about this. In talking with brands, that's exactly what companies want, though. That's exactly what, GOs want in this process, is predictable dates. So, these are estimates. Everything we're giving you here in this session are estimates, our
Yeah.
best estimates based off of what we understand and know.
And remember now
But
that, oh, I'm sorry, John.
just let me finish the thought. Is
Yeah.
that, I recall listening to incredible frustration from the people who put together the Barcelona city TLD in the last round. They had to go through 3 regime changes while this process, evolved from beginning to end. And so the thing that I would apply here is just patience. You will have to have patience, even if you're not a doctor.
So I was just going to say, I think the one other factor is that ICANN's designing a full program and not just a one round. So what they're doing now is to, or if they approve the policies, what they should be doing is, thinking of this as an ongoing program where you'll have an application window, and then after some point in time, you will open up the next application window, and just keep, doing these kinds of rounds in a steady state way. And for that, they really need systems in place to be able to do it. They need personnel in place to be able to do it. While I love the staff that they have, individually, I think they're all great. They just don't have the experience and expertise that's out there that's needed to establish such a program. They're very well staffed with policy people, but they're not staffed with operational people and people that have done this in the past. So that's one of the reasons. Again, I think I'm tending to err on the side of a longer time period. These are all things that can be fixed, but ICANN needs to, in order to fix it, they would need to move a lot quicker than they are used to.
So I see in the chat, there's a couple of questions on, they could move faster. And I think, Jeff, you were alluding to that, earlier with, there are things that could speed it up. What would those things be? If you can just name a few, maybe off the top of your head, or if it's a big, long conversation, maybe I'll save that. Totally up to you. Jeff, can you hear me?
We lost him.
He was having
you're on
some
mute.
connection problems. Are you there, Jeff?
Oh, I'm here. I got frozen for a second. Can you hear me now?
Yep. Could
Awesome.
you hear me?
Yep. Yeah, I did. Okay. So I think that, working these issues and things that they have to do in parallel will certainly help, as opposed to sequential, even though they're not used to working in in such a parallel processing way. I think hiring up staff, consultants, full-time staff, whatever it is, they have to ramp up. I also think that they can start things like, and we'll talk about it when we talk about costs, but they can start the pre-approval process for back-end technical providers so that can get underway. So there's a lot of things that they can do. The question is, will they do it? And that's kind of up in the air.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to jump to the next question just to make sure we're on time. For anyone, contemplating the application process or vying for a string, what things, what smart things should they do, and by what timeline, and in what order? So we heard 2025. Is this something people should wait on for a little bit longer, or can they start preparing a little bit now, and where would that be?
So I have my views. I think that, especially for brands anyway, brands go through a very long product budgeting or product and budgeting cycles. And so if you need a budget for, let's say, applying for a TLD and everything that goes into it, and that's going to happen in 2023, 24, then this next budget year, if you're on a calendar year of 22, is really when that budget needs to be developed, finalized, approved. And so in order to be doing that kind of thing, you need to look at the feasibility of having a top level domain within your organization, and really working on getting a champion or multiple champions within your organization to not only sponsor the program, but hopefully be there long enough to see it through to eventual launch. And so the time is, if not now, it's really soon to begin working on this and thinking about it and developing kind of your strategy. And for generic TLDs, I think it's as well, it depends, if you are going to be a solo applicant versus a new donuts, let's say, that is going to be a portfolio applicant. Those applicants need to raise a lot of money, and they're going to have to start sooner than later, and hopefully have investors that have a tolerance for a long cycle.
Awesome. Phil, Jothan, anything to add?
Yeah, I agree with Jeff on lots of those. I was going to say, I think it's very important to get the buy-in at kind of a board level initially, and then perhaps like set up if you're a global company, set up a cost center, and then a small kind of dedicated team, maybe 5 people, and then what you've got to do is there's so many different business functions that are potentially involved in this, so you've got to get the buy-in from kind of IT. Obviously, the legal team, the marketing team. So there's loads that you could kick off and to do. And then if you're going to be a generic application, I think the biggest problem is the funding of all this. And you're gonna, if you end up in a contention set, then you've got to factor that all in. So, you're talking millions and millions of pounds to kick this off. So there's loads of things you could do and start right now, in my opinion.
I agree with that. If you're, well, I am not ICANN. I had the privilege of working with some really talented people. My exposure, Jeff mentioned there's a lot of really policy related people. There are a lot of maybe not everybody's exposed to them all the time. I had the privilege of working with a lot of people there who were dedicated to the last round in 2012. And many of those people are still there, not left to go to the private sector. And there is a lot of, I think, learnings from the last round that can be put into this to help with some expedition. Jeff mentioned that, the new subsequent procedures contemplate decoupling the review of technical elements so that a provider, rather than, if there's 40 different applicants who use the same backend provider, that instead of reviewing the technical backend 40 times in that process, an efficiency was gained to where they said, what if you just review that backend once, and then that, it's not certified or however you'd put it, but then the applicants, instead of answering that 40 times, can just say, we're using this one. And that saves some time. And those providers could be being reviewed in advance of the process, and likely would need to be reviewed in advance of that process. So you could decouple pieces of this, kind of create atoms and deal with those atomically as you go. The process, when we evaluated last round back in, from 2012 to 2014, there was a lot of build as you fly. By the time the applicant guidebook that kind of defined everything got to us, it had gone through multiple iterations and was still getting refined, and is still to this day being refined. I don't think we'll ever find perfect. And I think that's something we shouldn't be aspiring to, rather than just progressing forward to meet the needs and demands of expansion and innovation and competition that ICANN is kind of directed to introduce. So I think we could be working on things now. It's kind of splitting that up. And ICANN has this new process called the ODP, where they'll take and do a quick review, look at costs, look at how things work, and use that to maybe advance, at very least, the back end review and some of the things that could be leveraged towards making this a reality.
Yeah, I
That's-
think, reading in the chat and reading everyone's, feedback, I think everyone really believes that, a lot can be done in parallel to speed it up if they so choose to do it. So there's lots of comments and lots of information and ideas being shared. So I think everyone's, I think on the same page there. I'm going to jump to a few pre-launch questions. So you were just talking about the applicant guidebook. Last time it had, the 2011 version had 5 big sections. They're fairly lengthy. How different do you think that the next applicant guidebook will be? Are we going to see significant changes all the way through, or just certain sections? Kind of giving you an easy one there.
I guess I'll start with this. So again, this all kind of assumes that ICANN board approves what was put before them. And going on that assumption, the answer is it'll be very similar, but very different. And I know that's kind of a weird answer, but very different in the sense that if it operates the way it should, the technical components should be separated out, as Jonathan said, into sort of a separate guidebook for the technical operators and for what it's going to take to be, a back-end provider, or even providing those for yourself. Then the non-technical portions, I think, are going to look very similar. I do think that there are a lot of what was actually done in the last round, whether it was in the guidebook or things that came afterwards. A lot of things were recommended to sort of stay the status quo. And so I think that's what will happen. But again, there'll be little changes here and there. And I know we'll talk about some of the contention set resolution things that may change. But in theory, I hope Martin Sutton is right when he says in the chat, and he said it before, we should only have one draft version of the guidebook for applicants. And then hopefully after comments, we can move on, unlike the 10 or 15 subversions and versions that we had the last time.
Great. Anyone else?
Yeah, I agree, Jeff, but I think when the GNSO signed off on this and sent it to the board, they actually approved, I've written down here, 300 new outputs, as we're calling it. So but are any of them major changes? I mean, there's no sort of major policy changes. I know we reached consensus on all but 2, right? So the working group didn't reach consensus on closed generics. So I don't know how the ICANN board's going to play that one.
Yeah. So Krista, is it okay if I jump in and respond?
Please. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So Phil's right. There were 300 what's called outputs. Many of those outputs were what we called affirmations, which were the things that were in the policy or things that happened the last time. Were just affirming those and saying, yeah, that's good. We should do that in the future. So that does take up a good portion of them. There are a couple big changes and a couple, as you said, Phil, a couple big issues that still haven't been fully resolved. One we'll talk about, which is contention set resolution. And another one is, of course, the closed generics issue. But once those are decided, those will not require, neither of those will require big changes to the guidebook themselves. They are pretty much, if you decide to allow closed generics, then actually very few changes will have to be made. If you decide not to allow closed generics, well, very few changes still need to be made. Maybe just, a section that says you can't do this. But at the end of the day, I believe the bigger issues are not ones that will require huge guidebook sections devoted to them.
Awesome. Maybe I'll jump and, we're talking about different TLDs and, people will apply. Do you see certain areas or strings that will be in large contention sets? Like last time we saw app, it had a lot of applicants to it. The world has since changed. Any predictions?
Well, yeah, I'll quick, and then I'll turn over to Jonathan because I know he's usually a better fortune teller. First thing I would say is, look, I think people are going to hold their strings a little bit more tightly to their vest than they did the last time, because those that disclosed what strings they were applying for faced contention. So that's not a good idea, you generally. Unless you're like some monster player that says, well, even if you are, you just shouldn't release your string ideas to others before the application process. You're inviting contention. But I do think there are a couple generics in a couple different industries that we may see some fights, some newly developed things. I'm not going to give away those strings, but I could certainly see some in the financial and technical areas that you can have large contention sets fought over. But again, I think that there's going to be a lot more brands applying. So in theory, that should mean a reduction in contention sets, but we'll see.
Jonathan, jump
Yeah.
in.
So, one of the things that delays cause is innovation, beyond the envelope. And there's technologies, I'll tell you of a couple that I'm aware of now. .crypto, it didn't really have a place in the 2012 round because I think people weren't, it was so early in the blockchain space. But you've seen technologies like unstoppable domains and Handshake and other technologies trying to route around what's perceived as a cloggage in innovation. And so you've got contention already just among these different technologies. They're essentially alternative routes. They are pirate radio, for lack of a better term, if you think of the ICANN as the federal communications, the FCC. But essentially, you've got already two competing .cryptos. You've got a variety of different contention sets there. So where innovation has spilled out into other areas, you're going to see a lot of growth. But it's difficult to really own a word, especially in the generic sense. So it'll be very interesting to see how that manifests. I anticipate we will see contentions. There's also kind of the name collision stuff where people are already using stuff on the internet that has conflicts with existing systems or early configurations. And so I think those are a little bit telling as far as what we might anticipate to see in the upcoming rounds. But there's a ton of new technologies that have evolved since the last round was open. Coin would be a string I would see applied for nowadays. Crypto, these are new things. Wallet, these are concepts. At least I'm focused in blockchain, but there's other evolutions that have happened, and so we will see things on pace as technologies evolve as we go. But there will be collisions, no doubt, especially given that there will probably be more applicants with aspirations, and there's such a big dictionary out there in a variety of different languages.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that's, we talked about innovation in the first round. And really, the blockchain one is where there really truly is innovation and people are, making their way around it. So we'll see it, but I agree with both of you. And we keep jumping to, I guess, kind of more the launch items. And we were talking about, the requirements and the regulations and a lot on, the application fees. What are you expecting, or what can people expect to see in the next round? Phil, do you want to go ahead first, maybe?
Let me think a little bit more.
Okay.
So we had the application fee at 185,000, right, last time. But that was kind of made, the way it was worked out was made up of three elements to it. It was like the application process, then what they ended up paying the evaluators, and then ICANN decided to have like a legal fund, didn't they? And it was split kind of like three ways, so it's about 60, 60, 60. But this time round, I think what we're saying is that we're not going to have that element, that legal fund, if you like. That's not going to happen anymore. Is that right? Is that what we're thinking?
No, that will happen. I think hopefully it'll be less because they had certainly a large surplus, although they're still spending some of that money. I think here's where I think efficiencies can be achieved, right? So if you have this back-end process of approving back-end providers, and you only have to evaluate them one time as opposed to every single time that they had to be evaluated the last time, you can, most of the technical evaluation costs can then be charged to that process. So the back-end provider could pay, that part of the fee when they seek to get pre-approved as a back-end provider. So that already is, $40,000 or $50,000. I forgot exactly the amount. So that, in theory, can be taken out of the fee. Then one of the things that we have been trying as a group with the subsequent procedures is saying to ICANN, okay, you basically attributed so much to what's called historical costs that became part of the application fee, that component of the application fee was so large. But the reality is you are operating a budget right now where you are in for all these years have been making a little bit of a surplus. It's not like you're losing any money in all the work you've done to date or the community's done to date on this. So the historical component of the fee should truly only cover the true costs of what it's going to take to ramp up for this process, as opposed to everything that I can put into this pile of historical costs. And then the third element, which is the contingency fund, or some call it the litigation fund. Again, I don't think, you're of course going to have to put some money aside for that, but whether that's $60,000 per application, as it was essentially for the last round, I think that's way too high. So if things work the way they're supposed to, and if ICANN's truly following a cost basis and is truly contemplating an ongoing system of rounds, it should be significantly less, but I will go out on a limb and say it's not going to be below the $100,000 mark. And if it is, it'll be like a 99,999, but it's not going to be any lower than that.
I agree, and I think in one of the recommendations was the application fee floor, where there should be a minimum amount, and any of that amount would be used, in a different fund. So going forward, some of those funds would be covered.
Yeah.
So,
eventually refunded back to the applicant, right?
Once
they've kind of done an audit on the costs.
Well, there's two parts. So it would be cost recovery, but if it was cost recovery was less than the fee floor, then the fee floor pot goes into a contingency for future rounds. But if it's above that, it's refunded to the applicants.
Sure.
So
that's the proposal.
That's a proposal. That took a long time, but anyways. Anyone want to guess a cost, or am I pushing the envelope a little too far there? We're saying not less than 100. Does anyone want to guess a price? No.
I think it's prudent if you budget for what it cost last time, that's a good conservative way to estimate this. Now, my gut is it'll be 115-ish. Yeah, I think they'll knock about 70 off, but don't hold me to that. Don't bet on that. I would say conservatively, if you're budgeting for this, if you're a company who's preparing, you've got the right stakeholders and people who are going to get this, or if you're a GO or even individual business owner, plan for 185. That way you've got a little extra sort of management reserve to work with, because there'll be unexpected costs.
Hey, Jonathan, there's a coupon code there for you.
Groupon, yeah.
I mean, the other factor is that, if there's going to be a lot higher number of applications, say we have as I said, 5,000. So therefore they're going to have to double the number of evaluators so that they can get through all these applications and doing a hell of a lot quicker than they did last time. So, that's going to cost them a shed load more money, isn't it? and then they've got to train them up to make sure that they know what they're doing and blah, blah, blah. So, yeah.
So I'm going to be like Jothan, I'm going to throw out a number. I'm going to say 130. That's my number. So we'll
Right.
see.
Well, this will be recorded, so we'll be able to, come back and it's a dollar bet, Krista.
Done.
Let's see. Okay.
Okay. We're talking about auctions. And so, there were a lot of applications in the first round that received large financial windfalls from the auctions. How are those changes going to be rolled out in the next round, and what can people potentially expect?
Okay, so we need to distinguish between the types of auctions because not everyone may be familiar with that. So in the guidebook itself, if a contention set cannot be resolved privately, it goes to what's called the ICANN, what we all call the ICANN auction. And in that kind of auction, the funds that are paid for the string are not shared with the applicant. So there's no, the only windfall there is to ICANN in theory. But what you're talking about really is that in the last round, there were, as I just said, you can work things out privately. And so some of the applicants came up with an idea to privately resolve these contention sets. They would have these private auctions where instead of the money going to ICANN, it would go be distributed amongst the quote losers of the auction. And some of those went for a large amount of money. And so while some registries did get a windfall from that, and there's some public companies that had to disclose that, obviously there were a number of members of the community that didn't like the notion of a public resource going for being auctioned and in that kind of way where the applicants themselves would benefit. There's also a concern in the community that if that practice continues, you will have people applying not necessarily to get the string, but to just lose in an auction, right? If it's 130,000, as you said, Krista, but you think you're applying for a string that's definitely going to be in contention, and you think someone's going to pay millions of dollars for it, then there may be a bunch of applicants that choose to risk it, and worst case scenario, you're the only applicant, you get the TLD. In order to kind of dissuade that, there were some policies that were recommended. I shouldn't even say recommended. There were policies that were discussed within the subsequent procedures working group, but those didn't get full consensus. So according to the policies as they were recommended, it was to just do things the way they were the last time, with a couple changes like a certification that you need to apply for the purpose of operating the TLD and not for the purpose of, making a windfall. But how enforceable that is, we'll see. There are still a lot of community members that are concerned about that. And this may be one of the areas where the ICANN board may make some adjustments. And I can't imagine an unfettered private resolution of contention sets allowing these private auctions to continue in the subsequent rounds, even though that's what was in theory recommended by a subpro. I just think there's too much baggage with that and too much potential harm to ICANN's reputation for being seen as creating a system that allows applicants to get this windfall.
Awesome, thank you. I think that really kind of gives a lot of flavor for people going ahead and how to consider it, because obviously that's could have potentially big effects on your application and how you're going to plan for it. I'm kind of running out of time, so I'm going to do 2 last questions. What is one piece of advice you'd give to anyone who is thinking of applying for a gTLD in the future round?
Who do you want to go first?
Go ahead, you're talking.
Oh, okay. So I think anyone who applies needs to be realistic when they apply. They need to understand the significant costs involved, the significant time periods involved, and how long it will take from the prep to the application to getting it delegated and launching it. I mean, that's a very long cycle that a lot of applicants, took applicants 4 or 5 years. Some of them are just launching, now. .music is one of those. So that's a 10-year cycle. I hope, knock on wood, it won't take that long, but they need to be realistic that they need to make sure they budget for several years if they have employees and things like that. And also realistic in terms of volumes that they expect to achieve if they apply for a generic string. I think too many people went into the last round thinking, well, there's, hundreds of millions of com names, and therefore there's going to be hundreds of millions, or at least millions, of these new great generics that I'm applying for. And that just, wasn't the case. There were, a very few TLDs that broke the million name, that truly broke the million name mark. But that's not going to happen in the future. You need to be realistic. You need to be very conservative in your budgeting. It's great to have a dream, but it's also much more important to be very realistic in the process. Yeah, that's my biggest advice.
Phil?
I was going to follow on from Jeff. I was going to say, you need to understand the marketplace and what the hell's going on. And it's completely changed from 2012 in every sense of the word. So yeah, I mean, and it's incredibly, you think about it, there's now what, 1,200 gTLDs in the marketplace. They're all competing for space, let alone .com and .uk, obviously .fr and the country codes. So it's an incredibly competitive marketplace out there. So yeah, and then that rolls on to, your pricing model, and yeah. And then ultimately to me it's like owning a TLD, does it actually add value? Value add, that's the word in my head.
Awesome. Jonathan?
Yeah, let me build on that. So I think that Jeff and Phil have given incredibly good advice. And I would only maybe complement that to say, get it going now. I'll kind of go tip my toe into the brand area, is that you need executive sign off. You can't just sort of put your toe in the water for this unless it's just sort of a protective play. I've seen, I think Jeff touched on this earlier, but there have been brands that have, withdrawn their applications, or are canceling them now. And I'll say that there's a huge difference between a .brand that's focused on this, that has executive support and has a stakeholder who understands the space, who's following it, and can really be a evangelist internally, because this is going to compete for budget, not just in the ways that have been described, but when you sit down and you plan out quarters or annual or roadmaps, this is going to compete with other projects inside of companies, and it's going to need resources. It's going to need rebranding of business cards and websites and it's not you're just going to be able to get this and the magical unicorn dust is going to start spraying from it. You have to put work in, and you need some dedication. And a lot of the brands that have thrown theirs back have been where they don't have that resource. So it's kind of a do or don't. If you're going to do it, bring in somebody who can help you with that, who's an expert, and really focus and get that advocacy going.
I agree with what everyone's saying, and I would add, look beyond the application. Drawing a parallel to the Olympics, a successful application gets you there, but once you're there, you still have to perform, and that's dependent on your preparation, which ties into, say for generics, you need to focus on your business model, especially the market segment you're going into, the resources you're going to need to penetrate those markets. And then for brands, as you're just saying, you need to use an appropriate measuring stick to understand its value. That's the improved user experience, conversion rates, ROI, and stop using registration rates for brands. Use registration revenues for generics.
Yep.
And I think we need to stop that. Go ahead.
If I could add one more thing, is if you're a company that's aspiring, contact ICANN and tell them. So I think that they need that input to understand that there is a priority here. And apply the pressures that you can if you feel that you want this to move forward.
Yep.
They can't assume that they know what you're thinking.
Yeah, and I also want to add on the brands, since we didn't really get too much into this, about the brands that have withdrawn. I think there's somewhere around 90, 92 or so that have dropped. I think the problem there was that there were some consultants and organizations that were scaring brands into actually applying when those applicants didn't have a champion internally and didn't really want the TLD. They just wanted to, they were afraid that someone else would apply for the string of their name. And so a lot of brands dropped out initially when they found out no one else applied. And then, a lot of brands dropped out as the process going through ICANN took forever and organizations turned over. So a lot of brands just didn't have the stamina to endurance or willingness to wait that long. And brands are a very different animal, right? Companies have product life cycles. It's very normal for brands to have products. If they're successful, to keep them. If they're not, in their view, successful, then to just phase them out, right? To move quickly. Some of them view the TLDs in that kind of way, right? If the TLDs they got, if it didn't necessarily do what they had expected it to do, they may have just, folded it. Other brands gave up their, either consolidation, because of consolidations, mergers, acquisitions, no longer use that brand. So I view a lot of the brands dropping not as a negative sign that brand TLDs don't have value. I think it's a natural evolution. And the other thing I will say is that it proved to the community that it's okay for a top level domain to be removed from the root. It's okay for it not to succeed and be a permanent fixture in the root. I think there was so much concern prior to the last round of, oh my God, what happens if a TLD quote fails? And what we've learned is it's okay. It is fine. The root is stable. The root is strong enough. And if it fails, so what, right? I think that is an important lesson. I think one that is not necessarily talked about, but certainly was the impetus for so many discussions prior to the last round.
Awesome. We're kind of out of time, and I noticed there were only a few questions that were generally answered in the Q&A pod. So I'd like to take a moment and thank my panelists, Jeff, Jothan, and Phil. Thank you for joining me today. Perhaps if anyone has any additional questions, they can contact you directly or send you an email. I assume that's okay. If not, say no.
No problem.
And really that concludes today's session. I'd like to again thank everyone who joined us today, along with the Internet Commerce Association for hosting today's session, and especially Camelia and Zach for all their help. For upcoming ICA sessions similar to this, or to become a member of the ICA, visit www.internetcommerce.org. Again, thank you all, stay safe, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.